Thank you for those kind words of introduction. I think I'll divide my intervention in two different parts from two different perspectives. One, as a member of the steering committee of the ECFR, which produced this document, and indeed its outer dress is very much following the design of earlier reports. By this, as well as by the method employed, we wish to emphasize the continuity of this exercise that the ECFR is engaging in, and which is meant to evaluate at the end of each calendar year how well has Europe performed as a common agent for foreign policy. And when we started out, I must admit that among the members of the ECFR, we were wondering if there would be anything to report on in terms of common European foreign policy. Would it not be like looking for an association of owners of pet unicorns and to try and describe what their activities had been? It was a notion that would sometimes be honored in the breach rather than in the performance. We started this exercise, I remember, by a meeting with Lady Ashton, as she had been just elected, and we had a group of us, a so-called fireside chat. Of course, there was no fireside. Lady Ashton didn't even have her own offices as yet. She had to borrow them. She had just a handful of staff with her, and admitted quite openly that as far as a common action service goes, it would take at least a year and probably two to really get all the mechanisms in place and to have in it an instrument for forging and executing foreign policy such as had been envisaged in its creation. The notion of giving a scorecard to Europe, as much as children get a scorecard, a report card, that they have to ring back to their parents and have it signed to ensure that the parents have seen it. And I think all of us remember some moments in our lives when either in this subject or another, or this test or another, we were not ourselves happy with the result. And the idea of showing this report at home was not exactly a happy one. If any country mentioned in this report gets a feeling that report isn't maybe as brilliant as they would like to see it, we will be very happy about it. Because that's precisely the intent of it, is to draw attention to the performance of Europe as a whole, of Europe as truly a union, a supranational union of nations, but also, of course, the parts that make up this whole. Our hope, I think, for those who care about Europe, is that the sum of the parts will be greater than a whole at some point. And when the day comes that the European External Action Service truly can represent a strong, united, conceptually well-argumented and broadly accepted consensus of attitudes to take towards this part of the world or another, that will be the day when I think such reports as you have now before you will become redundant and superfluous. Although I doubt it will be so simple, and I think feedback, evaluation is an important aspect of planning the future actions of any enterprise, including one's foreign policy. A few words about the method. Some of you are familiar, having followed this over the years, others not. I will remind you briefly that we have experts, reporters if you like, in each country, in each member country of the EU, going out and interviewing those who are actively involved in either performing foreign relations or in observing them and evaluating them. These are then put together into a report about that country and its performance, and evaluated against a sort of a series of parameters on which we try and break down into components the activities of what is, after all, a very complex situation. We had started out by looking at 80 different parameters and realized that that's really too much. One can get into fine-grained detail to a point where it becomes counterproductive. One may lose sight of the forest because of the trees. And therefore the number of parameters are cut down to 66, which I still think, as a former scientist, is something that is too much. Indeed, it's because as a former scientist I had at first expressed doubts about the possibility of giving a scorecard to Europe that I was rewarded by being put as a co-chair of the steering committee. They thought that if I was critical about it, that's the sort of input that they needed in order to get the project rolling. So we started out as co-chairs with Mr. Vittorino, and since last year we are two co-chairs with Jaap de Hoop-Schäfer as my partner. Since of course I know him way back from the NATO days, it's a very happy collaboration, and we have a group of volunteers from the ECFR who are really quite active. They are anxious to participate in the steering group. The steering group is quite large, so that the input that the staff gets in terms of putting the report together really gets a lot of feedback from people from different countries, from different walks of life and different sorts of experience, including those who have had experience in foreign policy or in think tanks or what have you. The results of what we have are divided, if you like, you could slice them different ways. We present the report in different countries. And of course it's like a child getting their own report in their own name. A country wants to know how it has been evaluated in relation to its neighbors and to Europe as a whole. And this is why we have some countries which, as it were, we pat them on the back by saying that they have been leaders, and others whom we say, well, they have not really been very active, they have been neutral. For instance, Latvia very often falls into that category simply because of its situation, its resources. One cannot really expect it to be a great world leader in great many international affairs. But yet, each country, surprisingly enough, large, small or medium, at some point or another has been a leader in some fields. And for this we are truly gratified to see. In other words, the idea of a 2-speed Europe or a 3-speed Europe, or how many ever, like on the bikes, you're going to have a speeds, I think is a pernicious one. In reality, of course, the larger countries have more weight. It's understandable, they do. But the whole point of the Union is that it is not just made up of 3, 4, 5 countries. It is made up of a whole lot of them. And they all should make input at some point. They should be consulted at some point, and they may be and become leaders on certain questions where they have particular expertise, such as, for instance, being neighbor to, as Andrejs Pildegovičs pointed out, or somebody who lives as a neighbor of Belarus has a different perspective on what is happening in that country than somebody, say, from Portugal or Spain. The evaluation that the writers of the report gave, if you like, the mark that Europe got as a whole is higher than last year. So that we can say the student has progressed. The student got a better mark this year than last. Not across the board. You will see in the report that, for instance, in certain aspects of the relationship with the United States, the mark is not a very good one. The performance is very uneven. And this is something that, of course, makes the task of the scorecard all the more difficult. It's not as if some countries are marching ahead full speed, and being leaders and everything. Then you have the rear guard who are dragging their feet behind, and the rest sort of muddling along in the middle. It really is a multi-dimensional performance that we're looking at on the part of Europe, and it is made up of components as to in which direction you are casting your eyes to evaluate how well Europe is performing with that. I take the point that Andrejs made about us not being able to look far enough in evaluating the impact of Europe. And one of the reasons for it is technical, is that we look in Europe itself and its activities to see how it has performed or done something. If Europe has been almost absent from the scene, or hardly seen or heard, then of course we will not be including that in our effort. The range of links with other parts of the world, I think, has been increasing as we get more skilled at writing these reports. Our very first attempts were quite narrow, and then we were shocked by the events of the Arab Spring. And the ECFR members felt that, much like everybody else, we had been taken by surprise. We certainly hadn't been able to predict that such events would happen with such speed and with such a wildfire spreading from one country to another. And this is, I suppose, something that all think tanks must remember, and all report writers and evaluators. We do not have sixth sense or ESP in terms of predicting clairvoyance about events in the future. As if you look at the report, what it concludes about Ukraine, realize that this is about 2013, and the report was finished at the end of 2013. And the paragraph on Ukraine ends on a hopeful note, and saying that maybe it is still possible to negotiate with the president, who was still in office at the time, and that maybe by 2015 something would happen. Well, I think the part about 2015 may be a realistic date for saying something might be moving. But indeed, events have been so rapid that they have changed not by month and week by week, but literally from one hour to the next. So the world does not stand still while we look at it. It's not something like a dead bug that you put under a microscope and you can look at it from all angles at your leisure and then make your conclusions about it. We are looking at a moving target, a world constantly in motion where different forces act, interact, and come up with results that we're frequently surprised about. So what we are doing is, it's a glance, we're casting a glance backwards over the passing year and sort of doing an evaluation, the sort of thing we do personally on New Year's Eve when we face a new year and say, I'm turning a new page, I'm going to eat a more healthy diet, do more exercise, stop smoking, etc. We are hoping that Europe will do something of the sort of thing, that it would say someday take decisions of the kind that would say, in terms of common policies, it would be really much better if countries, large countries like Germany, did not go counter to the common efforts that the Commission had achieved in terms of putting pressure on China about subsidies to the solar panel manufacturers. There are situations where there is obviously a common European interest. That common European interest has been identified, it has been analyzed, and recommendations have followed from it. And yet individual countries will go, as the French say, cavalier seul. You see, they get on their horse and ride off in all directions, certainly those that are in their own interests, and they forget about the common interests of the community. That is, I think, the weakness of the European Union, when individual countries and their commercial or economic interests come into conflict with the Union as a whole. But that, at the same time, is the very reason why we are looking for such a common policy, and why we have to keep working at it, as we have done for everything else. I don't want to really take up all your time. I just like to say a few words from another perspective, and that is as president of the Club de Madrid. We are a group of over 90 by now, former presidents and prime ministers of countries that have made a transition to democracy at some point. And therefore we ourselves have our plans and our projects and try and intervene where there is some kind of hope, where our intervention might possibly have some sort of effect, at least on somebody. From that perspective, I think that the neighborhood policy of Europe is indeed a very important one. I'm very glad to hear that the Latvian Foreign Ministry, represented here by Andrejs, is of the same opinion, because we truly have a resource in Europe that is not the same as other parts of the world. Other parts of the world have their priorities and their interests, and naturally one has partnerships with them. Recently I was invited, for instance, to participate in an effort that tries to get the concept of an Atlantic community, both North and South Atlantic continents, somehow thinking of the Atlantic as a trade route and what it means for the countries that are surrounding it. So if you look at the map, not from the usual way where we have put Europe in the center, but if you turn it around a bit, or if you have a globe, then you will see that the Pacific can be such a center, and you can look at the world from the point of view of countries on the Pacific. Europe really needs to concentrate on its closest neighborhood, that is the southern neighborhood, including not just North Africa, but also Sub-Saharan Africa, because it does have a serious impact on Europe's future, and the eastern neighborhood, and particularly the post-communist countries, which are struggling with the transition to democracy, very much deserve our support and our interest, because the challenges there are just as great as in post-colonial countries elsewhere in the world. I think that the evaluations themselves obviously are subjective at some point. Was it a good thing to do this, or was it a bad thing to do something else? Frequently, not doing anything is the worst possible scenario. And this is, I think, if I were to sum up in one word, what I personally would reproach the European Union is the lack of coherence, unity and strength in addressing various international problems. We have in the report praised the European Union and the External Action Service, where it was merited by truly strong interventions with firm policy decisions and also action plans that made sense and that have made an impact in the world, such as in the case of Kosovo, for instance. And there, these efforts get an A or an A- from us. But the failures of intervening sufficiently firmly elsewhere, I think, are very, very dangerous. And personally, myself, I have at this moment a very serious fear about what is going to happen in Europe, how strong the voice of Europe will be, how strong, by the way, the voice of the United States will be, as opposed to the very loud voice that we are hearing on the side of the Russian Federation. And this is, to me, the question that the near future is going to answer. Is there going to be some sort of pressure of international opinion that has its impact and its effect on events in Ukraine, particularly on the part of the European Union as an agent, or are many countries just going to stand back limply and watch idly as another country gets torn apart? That, I think, is a question for tomorrow. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I pass the floor to the experts that we have here from other countries.